Hello, this is Bill. And hello, this is Bill. Okay, we're still on chapter 10 on security. We'll start, we've already discussed encryption. We're now going on to integrity. So integrity, sorry about that. Integrity is verification of data. So basically, what was sent was what was received. You know, from a banking standpoint, someone deposits money into an account. Want to make sure that money that was deposited was deposited in the account, making sure the account was the right number, etc. So the data is there, it's accurate, and it was intentional. One of the ways we use to, one of the areas we use to validate data is a hash. Hash is very similar to what we have in layer 2 in our FCS. So this was a in this case it's a cryptographic hash function. And we use these for basically file hashes. It works very similar to a CRC, and that's one of the ways we can verify our file system and verify the files are accurate and what they should be. Your book does go over a few ways of checking a file, or a way of checking the file hash on a system, showing you how that can work. One of the areas we have to watch out with file hashes are what we call, what's that stupid thing, rainbow, collisions. So a collision is when we get the file hash calculates the same for two or more objects. The two file hash algorithms that are used most often are the MD5 and the SHA. So you'll see both of those used quite often, and those are, both of those are typical file hash algorithms you'll see. Again, MD5 and SHA. You will see SHA version 2 being used more often than MD5 at this point, but you'll still see MD5 used quite a bit. Next thing we want to talk about is non-repudiation. Non-repudiation, remember, is the ways to determine what action that a person took and the way to tie that action back. So we have non-repudiation again, and we're looking for ways to ID actions that a person took. Let's see. So ways to ID my person. And one way of doing this is a digital signature. So digital signatures are a hash of a public key encrypted with a private key. So remember we talked about public key. We talked about encryption. Again, this is a public key signed by a third party called a certificate of authority. And that's part of the PKI infrastructure or the public key infrastructure or PKI um, system, also known as the public key infrastructure. Oh, there's an E in there somewhere. Sorry about that. So, again, that's something we have on our system. So, for authentication, authentication is this is what we're going to use to positively identify a user. Now, we have many ways of doing this, and some of the common terms you're going to hear are local authentication. And local authentication is used by a single device. You know, when you log into your smartphone, for example, you might type in a PIN or face recognition or whatever, but that authenticates you only to that one device and doesn't authenticate you to other devices. The most common authentication mechanisms we do have is the username and password. Other methods coming up are being done today to make to actually overcome the weaknesses of the username and password. Again, problem with username and password, it's just something everyone knows. So someone, a username a lot of times is an email address, and a password. People use the same password for multiple accounts. They use it for the banking account. It's the same password for the banking accounts as their Facebook account or YouTube or Gmail. It's just the same password for everything. Sometimes people will say, well, they're more sophisticated. They use 2 or 3 passwords. The same username password for all the banking accounts. Well, you break into one bank and now you're into their banking and investment accounts. From a security standpoint, you really want to use a unique username and password for each account that you have. Not each type of account, but each account. So your Facebook would have one account. Snapchat would have a second authentication account password. Your banks would have one bank would have its own username and password. A second bank, if you had one, would have its own username and password. Your brokerage accounts would have their own username and password. Your email accounts, each email account would have its own unique username and password. And it's hard. We admit that it's difficult to do. So one of the ways to get around, one of the ways we're beefing up the username and password is with a technique called multi-factor authentication. Sometimes you'll hear this is called two-factor authentication. So both are basically the same thing. Multi-factor, because sometimes people have may have 3 or 4 different factors in a system. When we do multi-factor authentication, we have to combine different things. So typically with multi-factor authentication, we have to combine 2 or more categories of data. And the categories we have to do, you must know and you must know these for the test. So for the test, as you have to know for MFA, you have to know it's something you know. Again, this is your username and password. That's all it is. Something you know. Someone can figure out what it is. It's just one fact. They call it a single factor authentication. Yes, it's a username, and yes, it's a password, but it is still something you know. Something you have. So, use your ATM card. Your ATM card is something you know, your PIN number, and something you have, and that's your ATM card. So you can't just walk up to an ATM, type in your username and password, and get money out. You have to go in there, you insert your ATM card, you enter your PIN number. Again, if you without the ATM card, your bank account's not going to work. So again, something you know, something you have. And MFA combines at least two of these. Something you are. Now, this is also called biometrics. So, fingerprints, retinal scans, face recognition. Those are all something that you are, something unique about you. DNA, etc. So, something you are. And somewhere you are. So, this is a location based authentication. For example, you might not, some companies won't allow you to log in to certain workstations unless they're in a certain physical location. And they can do that with GPS, they can do that with any number of things. But again, you can't log in unless you're at a very specific location. Sometimes it's where they can narrow it down to a country. For example, where I work at the Water Reclamation District, we do what's called geo-blocking. If you're not in the United States, we just simply don't allow you to log in. It's that simple. So again, you have to. It's location based. Sometimes you don't want something to be able to start your car remotely unless it's within 50 feet. That type of thing. So again, somewhere you are, something you do. Now this is tough. And this is really tough to do. You don't see this a lot, but signatures. How you sign things, how you do something. Our mannerisms. Do we walk with a limp? There's just something, something you do. Something's unique to you, and some when you are. Now these are time based. Again, we don't use these a lot. Some organizations use them more than others. But again, if you can't log in between a certain date and time, for example, hey, you're traveling out of the country, so we're going to allow you to log in between certain periods of time. The way we do our quizzes here at the community at the college, Southern Nevada, we set those quizzes to fire off at a very specific time on the Canvas app. So you log in. If you try to take the quiz early or late, you're just not going to be able to do it. So again, that's some when you are. You're going to want to know the ones we combine 4 multi-factor authentications. We have at least 2 of these factors. Something you know, something you have, something you are, somewhere you are, something you do, and some when you are. You're most likely to encounter in the real world something you know and something you have. Biometrics are becoming a real thing now. Fingerprint readers, facial recognition, that's becoming real. Location based, again, that's used quite a bit. Not as often as some people would like, and it can be a bit of a hassle to work with sometimes. But if you know those three, something you know, something you have, by something you are, and somewhere you are, you should be able to answer pretty much any question on the exam. And now we come to authentication or authorization. Oops. So an authorization, this is what you're permitted to do. This is what is the account permitted to do? And we do this authorization with any number of techniques. Access control lists are very common. The term you're going to hear is ACL. Now, ACL, if you talk to a network person, to a server person, is slightly different. An access control list from a network person is basically usually IP address based, maybe location based. This IP address can get to that IP address, or this IP address cannot get to that IP address. An access control list for a server is more granular. In a server, it's not just location based or IP address based, but here it's what access do you have to access to data. And in there, can you read the data? Oops. Write the data. Modify data. Or delete data. So, with an access control list, you may give someone the ability to read data, write, modify, or delete, or any combination of those. Sometimes you might give someone the ability to write to file, but they can't modify the file. So those are access control lists. Another concept with an access control list other couple concepts we have with an access control list, and you will see these if you go on into a cybersecurity career, especially with this next one, especially with the federal government, the U.S. federal government military. It's called a mandatory access control list. Mandatory, or guess what? A Mac. I know it's a pain, but it's a mandatory access control. Within mandatory access control, this is an area where we actually classify data as into levels. So you may have a top secret, confidential, and a public. So we classify those, and if we not only classify the data, but we also classify the account or the staff. And you may have also the need to know. So if the data is classified, for example, as top secret, then the account or the staff person who wants access to that data only has a secret clearance. They can't get to that data. Also, now if they both have top secret clearances, but they have no reason to know what that data, for example, maybe there's a new top secret military weapon that we have, and someone's got a top secret clearance, but their secret clearance is in cryptography. They can't go and get access to that data or to that the plans for that jet aircraft or that new weapon system. The same person who has access to, say, nuclear secrets may not be permitted to access cryptography. So again, we classify the data, the account, and the need to know. The next thing we talk about is called discretionary access control. In discretionary access control, or DAC, and remember, in the exam, you're going to want to know what these abbreviations are, because sometimes the questions are going to limit to just have these out there, and you have to know what they mean. So in discretionary access control, the system has an owner. And it's the owner's responsibility to assign access. And the last one we have is called a role-based access control. In a role-based access control, a role gets everyone in that role has the certain access. So in this case, people are assigned roles. And the role is granted permission. For example, in an accounting office, someone who's got the role of accounts payable, they have certain ability to do modify the general ledger or pay access certain amount of data, where someone, say, who is an auditor would have a different type of role and different permissions for that data. Someone in, say, a purchasing department is authorized to purchase something, but they may not be able to assign budgets for that same item. So again, it's all based on a role. Now within the okay. Within security in a digital environment, we do have didn't know I was doing that. Didn't know I was scrolling. Okay. We do have certain TCP/IP standards within security. Okay. That's supposed to be the word standard, so let's go back to writing. And these standards, a lot of times, are used in communications. In fact, they're pretty much all used within communications itself. The first one we have is called the PPP, or the point-to-point protocol. This is actually used quite a bit, and these are where two devices connect and authenticate and negotiate protocols. Within the PPP standard, or point-to-point protocol standard, and within other standards, you're going to find different authentication mechanisms. With authentication mechanisms, we do have the first one is called PAP. We don't use this one very often anymore, but we do. It's every once in a while you will run across this one, and this is again, it's just not used very often. It's PAP, or the Password Authentication Protocol. Now the reason we really don't use this one very often anymore is it's really doesn't encrypt data is not encrypted protocol. Okay. It is the username is the username and password are transmitted in clear text. So username and password. So encryption does not take place with this protocol. So again, we don't use it very often anymore. It is you still find it once in a while some legacy systems. For some strange reason, I've seen it in some IoT devices recently. It's just one of those situations where it's a well-established protocol, but again, there is with the clear text in there, there is no security for this. So passwords are easily picked up over the using a device software called a sniffer. The second authentication protocol we have is called CHAP, or the Challenge Handshake Authentication Protocol. Actually, it should be all capitals. And that's the challenge. Now this one's gone through some changes over the years. And in this one, you actually don't pass the username and password actually don't hit the wire. What we actually do in this one, you type in the username and password, and the local system creates a hash of the username and password. And then that hash is transmitted. So when it gets to the server has a database of usernames and passwords. So it'll find the username and password in some fashion. It will hash those together here, and it will compare the hash that's transmitted here. And if the hash matches, guess what? Username and password are accurate, and the person's granted access, or the account's granted access. So again, I said CHAP's gone through some changes over the years, and the very latest version that we use is called MS CHAP. It was actually developed by Microsoft, so hence the MS. So and this is more secure than simply CHAP. So you'll still find both used quite often, MS CHAP and CHAP. I am going to stop here in this video, and then we're going to start in with AAA, TACX, Kerberos, and some encryption protocols in the next.